What if I told you there was once a king so physically and mentally broken that his subjects believed he was cursed from birth? A monarch so deformed, so dysfunctional, that he became the living embodiment of his dynasty's downfall. This wasn't a legend or a myth. This was Charles II of Spain. Known as El Hechizado, the Bewitched Charles, wasn't plagued by demons or dark magic. He was the product of something far more terrifying: centuries of royal inbreeding. This is the story of how Europe's most powerful dynasty, the Habsburgs, engineered their own destruction from the inside out. And the result? A king whose life was a slow-motion tragedy, whose body failed him in every way, and whose death sent shockwaves through the continent. If you want the kind of historical stories your textbooks were too afraid to tell, hit that subscribe button, because this is the real horrifying truth of Charles II. When foreign ambassadors were first introduced to Charles II, they were visibly shaken. The man standing before them wore the crown of the vast Spanish Empire, but his appearance was anything but regal. His lower jaw was so pronounced and malformed that his mouth hung permanently open, drooling uncontrollably. He couldn't fully chew or close his lips. Talking was a painful struggle, and even then, few could understand him. This wasn't simply a medical issue. It was the Habsburg curse made flesh. The Habsburgs believed in keeping their bloodline pure, but their version of purity meant marrying within their own family again and again. Cousins, uncles, nieces, even aunts intermarrying was the rule, not the exception. By the time Charles was born, his genetic inheritance was a nightmare. His parents were uncle and niece. Both sides of his family tree folded in on themselves, like a genetic echo chamber. The result was catastrophic. Doctors today would describe his condition as the result of severe consanguinity, extremely low genetic diversity. But to the Spanish court in the 17th century, he was simply not right. The so-called Habsburg jaw was more than just cosmetic. Charles couldn't bite or chew properly. His teeth didn't align. He couldn't eat solid food. Every meal had to be reduced to a mushy paste. Even then, food spilled from his lips, and servants had to constantly wipe his mouth. Mealtime became a grotesque ritual, a performance of royal agony. Worse still, his speech was slurred beyond recognition. Court scribes struggled to transcribe his words. Foreign visitors often couldn't tell whether he was speaking Spanish or just making noises. His own mother once wrote that she feared he might choke in his sleep on his tongue, and she wasn't exaggerating. But it wasn't just Charles's face that bore the cost of his bloodline's obsession. His entire body was a walking failure. Charles was born weak and remained that way for life. He didn't take his first steps until he was 8 years old. By then, most children were running and playing. Charles could barely stand. His limbs were thin, frail, almost skeletal. His head, on the other hand, was unusually large, swaying atop a neck too weak to support it. His back was hunched, his spine curved unnaturally, giving him the appearance of a man carrying an invisible weight. And in a way, he was the full weight of his family's genetic sins. Even in adulthood, Charles moved with the slow, unsteady gait of someone decades older. He stumbled through palace halls, using furniture to support himself. Servants described him as sluggish, hollow-eyed, and often dazed. His physical deterioration didn't slow with age, it accelerated. Most people grow stronger in their teens and 20s. Charles grew sicker. His muscles atrophied. His hair fell out in clumps. His skin was pale and blotchy. Even his eyebrows grew unevenly, giving his face an eerie, unbalanced look. Mentally, he was equally stunted. He didn't learn to read until age 10. Comprehension remained difficult for the rest of his life. He could recite prayers by rote, but struggled with anything unfamiliar. Tutors compared him to a leaky bucket. No matter how much knowledge they poured in, nothing stayed. Emotionally, he was a child trapped in a king's body. He threw tantrums over the smallest frustrations. At times, he screamed and flailed like a toddler. Other times, he fell into long, eerie silences, staring blankly into space for hours. Court officials feared he was losing his grip on reality, if he ever had it to begin with. His court painters, tasked with capturing his likeness, faced an impossible job. Even their most generous interpretations couldn't fully hide what Charles had become. They softened his features, brightened his skin, and restructured his jaw with a brush. But in real life, nothing could hide his deterioration. And that deterioration wasn't just physical. It had political consequences. As king, Charles had one critical duty: produce an heir. But he couldn't. He married twice, and both times his queens were blamed for failing to conceive. But the truth was brutally simple. Charles was functionally infertile. His genitalia, according to 17th century doctors, were severely underdeveloped. Some even described them as prepubescent in form. He had no facial hair, no signs of adult sexual development. His first wife was reportedly so distressed by their wedding night that she refused to speak of it. The blame, however, didn't fall on Charles. It fell on the women. His wives were subjected to endless humiliation medical tests, herbal tonics, bizarre rituals, all in the desperate hope of a pregnancy that would never come. His first queen, Marie Louise of Orléans, was eventually driven into deep depression. She died at just 26 under mysterious circumstances, possibly from stress, possibly from poison, possibly from both. Charles remarried quickly, this time to Maria Anna of Neuburg. But the second marriage fared no better. She, too, failed to produce an heir. Private letters reveal that Maria Anna was horrified by Charles's condition and increasingly convinced that the marriage was doomed from the start. And it was. With no heir and a crumbling monarchy, desperation led the court to darker places. When medicine failed, they turned to religion. Exorcists were summoned to the palace not in secret, but in front of witnesses. Charles, they believed, wasn't just sick, he was possessed. Priests conducted elaborate public rituals, dousing him in holy water, forcing him to drink mixtures containing ground-up relics and ash. The results were horrifying. Charles would convulse, vomit, scream, and collapse, interpreted as the demons resisting expulsion. These ceremonies were theatrical, almost performative. Nobles and foreign ambassadors were sometimes invited to watch. They didn't see a king being healed, they saw a king being tormented by superstition. One exorcist claimed to have cast out dozens of demons from Charles's body. Each one, he said, was responsible for a different symptom: his sterility, his madness, his physical decay. Incredibly, Charles believed them. After each exorcism, he sometimes reported feeling better, briefly, and then the symptoms returned. He began requesting more. By the late 1690s, Charles was a ghost of a man, barely able to walk, barely able to speak. His skin was pale and bruised, his hair thin and matted. His body was shutting down, system by system. When he died in 1700 at the age of 38, the Spanish court braced for scandal. His death was tragic, but what doctors discovered during his autopsy was something else entirely. Charles's organs were so diseased, so malformed, that many believed the rumors of possession might have been true after all. His heart, they said, was shriveled no bigger than a walnut. His lungs gangrenous and filled with fluid. His intestines partially decayed. His genitals described as severely underdeveloped. And perhaps most chilling of all, his brain was surrounded by excess fluid. Today, we know this as hydrocephalus. Back then, it was proof to many that Charles had been bewitched. The lead physician famously wrote, "This body contained not a single healthy organ. It is a miracle it sustained life for as long as it did." And with that, the Habsburg line in Spain ended. Charles II died without an heir, triggering a massive power vacuum. Within months, Europe descended into the War of the Spanish, succession of brutal conflict that would rage for over a decade and claim hundreds of thousands of lives. Charles II didn't just represent the end of a dynasty. He was its consequence. A man molded by centuries of inbreeding, elevated by bloodline and destroyed by it. The final king of a once great empire, powerless to rule, incapable of continuing his line, and remembered, not for what he did, but for what he symbolized. He was born into power, but cursed by his very DNA. And in the end, it wasn't an assassin or a rebellion that brought down the Habsburgs. It was their own obsession with blood. If twisted stories like this make history come alive for you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which royal disaster you want us to uncover next. Because sometimes history's true horror stories are the ones that actually happened.